Alright. You have come to a podcast that has recently changed its name. This is Shaggy Dog Philosophy. I am the Shaggy Dog Philosopher. You can call me V. I also refer to myself as Vinny or V-Dog. I don't actually refer to myself as V-Dog. That's not true. I do sometimes. But anyway, since I've recently rebranded and renamed, I should talk a little bit here at the beginning about what I'm doing while this screen is staying still. I talk to myself into this microphone aimed at you about my obsessive thoughts while I play a video game. For me, my idea is that I like to do things to occupy my eyes and occupy my hands, and in so occupying my eyes and my hands, I find it easier to access my subconscious, and by accessing my subconscious verbally, by just saying the things I'm thinking, I am able to hear my thoughts for the first time in real time with you. Last time I was playing this game, I couldn't figure out how to find the fruit, so I did that off screen. That was called talking to myself. This is continuing my series of East Origins, where I talk to myself about my obsessive thoughts, but I'm going to be leaning more into the Shaggy Dog nature. I'm no longer calling it talking to myself. I'm going to be leaning into the Shaggy Dog story nature of what I do, because I'd heard of that, but I didn't realize exactly how much the Shaggy Dog story, which is an American tradition, I believe it's a Southern American tradition, and I did grow up in the American South. A Shaggy Dog story, for those who don't know, and I should cut this out into a short so that I can introduce my channel with it. A Shaggy Dog story is a story where the storyteller has a vaunted topic or whatever, a vaunted story that they're supposed to be telling, but for whatever reason, because of the winding nature of their own brain and their own inability to concisely tell a story, they never actually tell the story. And so if you've listened to my podcast up to this point, I never quite talk about what I promise I'm going to talk about. That's why my titles are so terrible. But if you stick around long enough to become one of my friends, you will understand why I switched over to Shaggy Dog. Shaggy Dog more accurately represents not only my storytelling style, but my southern roots. I'm gonna die. Yeah, I still haven't done this right. Maybe it gives me an item. And so I think I've introduced myself, the podcast. The reason that I changed is talking to myself. It's too ironically narcissistic. Our culture, our world is too sensitive about narcissism right now, and too hypersensitive to trying to identify what narcissism is. So, ironic narcissism does that thing where it makes people have to think, and when people have to think, they compare themselves to what they're thinking about, so they think about themselves, and they do self-harm by comparing themselves negatively because they've been conditioned not to compare other things negatively. And so they're going to compare things negatively anyway, so they compare themselves negatively, because our culture is in the United States desperately trying to impress Europe, and since the Renaissance, Europe has been doing self-harm for the amusement of the world. Okay. And we're trying to imitate that. But that's kind of what I talked about last episode, which was sometime last week. It's been a while since I sat down to do this. I thought that damn thing... I can't read that. I thought it was supposed to give me an item. I gave it the Rotafruit. I thought I got the Rotafruit. I thought it was supposed to... Maybe it gives me a song. Maybe now I can do the song. Maybe that's what it was. Check this out. And so, today, what I want to talk about is the obsessive thought that I woke up thinking and that I put out of my mind. Because I thought, ooh, that'd be perfect for a podcast. And now it's gone into the preverbal part of my brain, the part of my brain that I taught myself through Zen meditation as a teenager to ignore. But we're going to try to dig it out. That's the point of this Shaggy Dog Philosophy podcast. So, what I quote was, a person's influences say a lot about them. That is, a person's influences say a lot about that person. And now that's a complex thought that I'll have to work at tearing apart. But what it made me think, and what I realized, I was about to do a thread on X that no one was going to read, so I may as well just eat and take care of myself a little bit and then sit down and do the podcast, was the following. When I was a kid, parents used to warn us to take seriously who our friends were. We ban books today, not because the books themselves are bad, but because the ideas in those books are gateways. So, gateways are ostensibly today's topic that we may or may not ever actually explore in a meaningful way. Because what I realized is that gateway was also a political code word for when I was a child, and so I found myself using, in fact, the political code words from my childhood without thinking about them credulously, or without thinking about them skeptically. So I think we've all heard that marijuana is a gateway drug, for instance. And whether you've been with me or you've stalked me and found my early blogs, my early work on my blog, or you've listened to Dan Carlin, or you've studied McCarthy-era American politics, you've probably heard the idea of the intellectual contagion. And so, if a thought is akin to a contagion, let's say a virus, let's say kind of like COVID, if a way of thinking can be contagious and it can spread to other people, and then other people can display the symptoms of those thoughts and be infected by those thoughts, then thoughts can also be, that's not what we're talking about today, a kind of like ideas can also be gateways. They can also be described as paths, as doors in a sense. And what that means is difficult for me to figure out how to say. So, ideas themselves lead someplace. I think that we know that intuitively, but I don't think that we appreciate that in a meaningful way. Because, well, I think that we have developed in late stage American capitalism this idea that ideas are imaginary, and because they're imaginary, they only have application insofar as you're dumb enough to try to apply them. And I think that's why I was and I think that's why I was so offended by relativism, is I can see now 200 years removed from the 19th century, as I am, as you in fact are. I can see how the ideas of relativism, that everything is relative to your position and what you do with it, are harmful. They're harmful to the individual who has them, because you can convince yourself that your road is your road alone and has no bearing on other people's roads. And you can defer or even refuse responsibility. And so I've been talking pretty frequently about how modern liberalism is the late modern period, or the late pre-modern period, or late early modern period, or whatever, the late 19th century's elite, 19th century elite's response to responsibility. And so maybe it isn't obvious, but responsibility is a particular duty to respond, right? And so if you say in a group setting that you're responsible for other people, what that means is that you're the one who has to apologize, and you're the one who takes the blame. Okay? And so what every person in charge, regardless of their social status, their social class from which they come, what everyone wants is the glory, and what no one wants is the blame. No one wants to be actually responsible, right? And so there's nothing wrong with that. What you want me to say is, and there's nothing wrong with that. That's normal, and because it's normal human behavior, there's nothing wrong with it. But there is something wrong with it, because what makes us human in a very real way and on a grand scale is our ability and the effort to which we go in caring for it's our ability to care for one another, and it's the effort to which we go to do that, to care for one another, is what makes us human, right? So I've heard anthropologists argue that what defines civilization, where you can start to make the claim for civilization or for humanity, for that thing that's somehow more than an animal, the moment that you can make that claim is when humans started to care for one another, when we started to care for the crippled and the lame and the mentally unfit, right? And if the studies, the surveys, the genetic data that I've been reading is correct, as much as 40% of the population, once you start to get a sizable enough population, and what that means is once you can raise children beyond infancy, and multiple children in a community beyond infancy, once you get a sizable population, it seems like about 40% of us are either crippled, lame, or mentally unfit. By young adulthood, by adolescence. So 40% is a big number. And so the eugenic and postmodern push to do things like abort children with Down syndrome, it has nothing to do with the things that they say it does. Like, they'll argue that it'll lower medical costs. And sure, there are doctors and there are administrators of hospitals who agree that it will lower the overall medical costs, and I'm sure there are insurance companies who agree that it will lower the overall cost of procedures, cost of medicine in general, if instead of the 40%, which is natural, you have something even less than the 15%, which we allow to be born today, born and brought to adolescence today. That's a sharp drop. And what I'm describing to you is I'm describing eugenic genocide. Okay? So anyway, the line is when you can support 40% of your population without killing them. That's where civilization is. That's when you can make a difference between. That's where anthropologists have started or often do draw the line between civilization and barbarianism, between neo and classical, not even neo, between proto and classical paganism. Because one of the things that nobody really wants to talk about is like that there is. So I'm talking about gateways, okay, and I'm talking about thoughts, and so different thoughts are hidden behind different doors. Let's say different ideas are hidden behind different doors, right? And so one of what I'm talking about is I'm basically saying like civilization v barbarians, right? There's a door between a barbarian way of thinking and a civilized way of thinking, and in order to get past that door, there are certain steps that you have to take. There are certain qualifications that one has to meet, and now the liberal response. What am I trying to say? So conservatives have, because of democratization, conservatives have wanted historically to have certain gateways between the voting and the non-voting person, so the citizen and the non-citizen, and those gateways between the citizen and the non-citizen, we colloquially began to call gatekeeping. Okay, so in the 90s, breaking down gateways and barriers became a big push in the United States. There was a big push for breaking down barriers and breaking down gateways and for slaughtering gatekeepers, let's say. Okay? And so now one of the things that you'll hear me talk about, if you listen to my Sea of Stars hate play, for instance, is the purpose of those gatekeepers. And the purpose of those gatekeepers in things like the political realm or nerd culture were to keep the quality of the conversation at the same but higher level, if that can make sense to you. So if all of the people that you allow into the club agree on the same things and are at the same level of education, and by education I mean consume all of the same things, and if they have the same degree, that is abstract hierarchy of understanding, then even where two members disagree, they can have high quality, high level dialogue about it. Now, if you aren't a member of the culture, if you are, so to speak, a barbarian, and let's be very clear, the term barbarian means a person who speaks like bar. That's what they sound like. Bar when they speak. So when you hear someone who doesn't know what the fuck they're talking about at any given moment, that's a barbarian. And that's what the term meant. To be civilized is a term that the Greeks didn't use because civitas, or I think it's civitatas, but the civitas, civi, is a civil, right? That's a Latin word. So the Greeks didn't call themselves civilized. But we use the Latin dichotomy, and if we're going to use the Latin dichotomy, the difference between civilized and barbarian is a civilized person speaks more than one language fluently. A civilized person doesn't just sound like bar 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 when they talk. They sound cultured and they sound fluent in various languages wherever they are, and when they speak, they know what the hell they're talking about. They sound like they know what they're talking about. They're eloquent. That that thing, the eloquence thing, is a lost skill set among today's humans, but especially among today's scholars. Like if you're on Twitter, you can really tell the people who read and who know what the fuck they're talking about from the people who don't read and really don't know what the fuck they're talking about. And that's what I meant when I said that a person's influences really speak to who they are, right? So if a person has a small number of influences, that means that, in a sense, they've only gone through a small number of gates. And the gate to which the language of this metaphorical language is referring is the gate of a city. Because cities were gated, and you were allowed to come and go, for the most part, fairly freely, even in the very ancient world. Like, passes, etc. were needed. But during the day, in times of peace, for the most part, you were able to pass in and out of a city, the gates, freely. So when I talk about gatekeeping and I talk about civilized v barbarian, I'm talking about a city that is in a state of war, okay? And so the civilized people, the people who considered themselves civilized, the civitatas, I believe that's how you say cities, civitatas in Latin, but I might be doubling up on it might just be civitas. I'm not sure. I don't actually speak Latin. I just know a little bit about Latin. What was I saying? The city, the Republican, because we're not a democracy. We're democratic. We're not a democracy, and there is no democracy in the world. The best you can hope for are monarchies and republics. So, we're not getting into what that means, because I'm trying to talk about a city, and I'm trying to explain what gatekeeping means and what the nomenclature means and why conservative people are interested in gatekeeping. Because I've already said, you keep your conversation, you keep your dialogue at a high level. You have a high level of understanding. You keep your dialogue at a high level means that you're able to make more progress toward truth when fewer higher quality people are doing all of the talking. But democracy says that fewer higher quality people doing all the talking is autocracy, and they're not wrong. It can become plutocracy, and plutocracy very rarely makes good decisions, because plutocrats tend very often to think that, like liberals, think they're the only people who can make good decisions, and they overestimate their actual decision making when it comes time to make important decisions. But we've already talked about how democracies are bad at making important decisions because it takes so many people, and the more people you involve, the lower the level of your dialogue is likely to be, and the lower the level of the dialogue is likely to be, the less or lesser likelihood you are to actually come to a good decision. Look at England in World War II. Look at how long it took America to get involved in World Wars I and World War II. World Wars I and II, and look at the decisions that they made with the world once it was their playground afterward, right? Look at what the American Senate and House of Representatives did. They gave away all their power to the presidency, and now the only thing that they can think to do to combat the presidency is install a prime ministership in the House of Representatives, which is hilarious and insane and not going to work. Okay, so why do you keep gates, right? Why do you keep people out? Well, you keep people out in a time of war. You keep people out in a time of war. Okay? Because let's not be naive and let's not act like during a time of war there aren't going to be people coming into your city trying to rouse the rabble against the city, right? Because wartime is a very stressful time on the home front during any period in history, whether you're fighting foreign wars like America was doing in Korea and Korea and Vietnam, or whether you're fighting police engagements, which is actually what they would call Korea and Vietnam, but a police engagement would look something more like Iraq, or what we're doing when we send soldiers in blue helmets to the Ukraine. That's a police action. So wars and police actions, or the anti-insurgency wars that we fought and continue to fight in the Middle East, and in fact that President Biden, either on Friday or Saturday, very recently announced we were going to double down on engaging in Israel, which, if you've listened to me speak, I'm not exactly thrilled about. I'm not exactly thrilled with how Israel is engaging on the world stage. I don't get an opinion, but I don't think it's awesome. You keep those gates because you don't want people coming in and rousing rabble. And the reason you don't want people rousing rabble is because of a lot of reasons. And so what I'm trying to get at is we acted like in the 90s and beyond, getting rid of all of the gates was going to solve all of our problems. That it was going to get rid of the impulse to keep the gate in the first place. But what we didn't know in doing that is a few things. I brought it up. Equality. We didn't understand the difference in equality under the law and equality in terms of social hierarchy. So, because of the French Revolution, the French and people with a French idyllic worldview, people who would like to be French and would like to be romantic and would like to be relativists and would like to just say, well, you think what you think and I'll think what I'll think, and it doesn't matter the difference, and we'll just find a way to like one another regardless of our differences. People who would prefer to think like that, and I have preferred to think like that over the aggregate of my life. So I'm not throwing stones where I live in a glass house. I have thought as an adult and as a young person that was the preferable way for adults to engage, is in a relativistic manner, that good enough is good enough, and if you can do you and I can do me, and you can stay within your circle and I can stay within my circle, we can all be cool. But the thing is that every circle wants to be the only circle. No circle of a sufficient size can agree that it's big enough. And I say this as confidently as I do because the 19th century happened, in fact. The monopolistic economics of the 19th century did in fact happen. And so what I'm getting at, and what I'm trying to say outright, is that the push in the 90s and beyond for equality under the law and equality within the society, that everyone is the same, is this insistence, is a secret and insidious insistence that you don't need to know the past. Okay? And so, if you know anything about game show mathematics, and I don't know why you would be interested in game show mathematics, but there was a game show in the Wayback Machine, way back then times, when wherein you had 3 doors, I believe is how the game was set up. And you would open a door and there would be a prize behind. You would get the choice of opening one of the 3 doors. And there was a prize behind it. And they would say, do you want to keep your prize or do you want to open one of the other doors? And the mathematics goes, and I don't want to break down the mathematics because I don't remember the mathematics. And in my heart of hearts, I argue that the mathematics is probably wrong. But the mathematics says that you always take what's behind the second door. Okay, so what am I talking about? Because I'm being very abstract. Well, what I'm saying is that the way liberals, not even liberals, because conservatives want to do this too. And in fact, I'm not entirely convinced that liberals didn't learn it first from conservatives, but what am I trying to say? What I said that history, learning history, studying history, knowing human history, being engaged and informed about where you've been as a human species and where you have been as a human person is, in a lot of ways, it's knowing what's behind the various doors. Right, and so having an understanding of history is having an understanding or having experience of the wisdom of the past. And the wisdom of the past, as we've been on before, is it's an experience of the trial and error of the past. And so what I'm saying in the context of doors and gates and ways, what I'm saying is that having an understanding of history is having a knowledge of what is behind the doors, right? And so I didn't know this until recently, but the ideal person or the ideal pursuit or the ideal way, let's use capital W initial caps way, the ideal way for a person to live was believed in the 18th and the 19th century to be individual, to be up to that person. And so when I've talked about enlightenment and I've talked about leisure and I've talked about the people that have the time to actually seek out wisdom and find enlightenment and be philosophique, right? These people could and would only be rich, okay? That you had to be rich in order to do this, and so in order to seek the best life and in order to attempt to live the best life. Now I know I'm about to run into a boss fight. And I don't really want to do that, but I'm going to anyway. No, I'm not. And so I've told you that Europe, but especially France, the whole world is like this. But it's easier to talk about a subject that's difficult to talk about if you talk about it in comparison to something else. And so the American worldview, the milieu that we believe about ourselves, what we believe about ourselves in the United States is that we're very grounded and down-to-earth people, that we're very practical. We're engineers, we're mathematicians, right? This is what we believe about ourselves. And so it's easier to compare that and say, well, is that true, is that false, with a people who don't think that about themselves. The French portray themselves as being very romantic, but what is very true about the French is that the French are very abstract, and so the French are very representative, okay? And it's good. It's a good thing because it allows me to see how much we're influenced by them, in fact, because what I've noticed is that writer who said that the thing that we agreed on was to not be French isn't true. We're very French. We've always been very French. We've been competing over how many of our deals should be how French, not whether they are or should or shouldn't be. So if I have an anti-French bias, it's because I've been taught to have an anti-French bias, not because necessarily I disagree with or I don't like the French. I kind of, like I'm saying, the French are representative, and I've been told to not be representative, to be very practical, and to not think abstractly, which has got me into where I am. It's got me into this trap where nothing is real to me, and nothing makes sense, because everything in the world is actually so abstracted and so representative, right? And so what I'm trying to say is that Europe, before the United States became what we think of as the United States, Europe understood that only a very small number of people had the time, and that means the leisure and the education, to be enlightened. And so what that meant is that the people who did were expected to be responsible for the people who didn't. And what that means is when a war would happen, or when cities weren't prosperous, or the country wasn't prosperous, someone was responsible. And what responsible means, we've talked about this, somebody had to answer for it, right? Cities were gated because if a war wasn't going well, or the people inside a city didn't believe that the war was going well, they wouldn't fight the war anymore. Or they would open the gates of the city to the invaders, and they wouldn't fight back, and they would allow the invaders to be the new rulers, the new regime. Okay? And so if thoughts are regime, because they are, okay? Thoughts are regime in this same way. Thoughts are invading armies in this way, because since the 18th century, but definitely since the 19th century, and most certainly since World War I, the world has been in a constant state of war over ideology, okay? And so every ideology is a city, and every man is expected to be a kingdom, right? And so a kingdom, every man is expected to be his own kingdom, right? His own sovereign. Okay, well, a sovereign is more than just one landmass that you're in control of when you're a sovereign. When you're a sovereign city-state, you aren't just in control of the immediate land encapsulated by the walls of the city, right? You're also responsible for the land which feeds and provides commerce for the city. Okay, so you're responsible for the city and the state around it, right? Something very few people think about, very few people realize when they say that you are a sovereign nation into your own. They don't understand what that means, how much, in fact, that makes you responsible for. It makes you responsible for also having a way, for having a philosophical way. That means having a truth. That means having a best way, not just a best practice, but a best way. Okay, and so what I'm saying is, when I said that you can. What I wanted to talk about is you can know a lot about somebody from their influences, right? Like if a person only quotes one book, like we make fun of Ayn Rand, and we make fun of tech bros who only have only ever read like Atlas Shrugged. But you can tell just as much about a person and what they know and what they've thought about by whether they've only read and watched Harry Potter as an adult, for instance, or whether they only watch Disney movies, or they only watch Marvel movies. And so what I was saying about social dialogue is the reason that groups would wrap gates around themselves, and then they would set up guards to keep those gates, is because of things like Centaur World. If you've watched Centaur World is what happens when gated communities merge, right? So it's a girl making what would typically be a boys' adventure cartoon with influences like Mulan and My Little Pony, but also things that girls would think are funny, but the themes are all things that would have typically been for boys, and so there are gates set up so that girls can't make that kind of stuff before the 90s. And then girls said, well, no, we're all equal, everybody should be allowed to participate. And there's nothing fundamentally wrong with saying that everybody should be allowed to participate, because democratization, saying that everyone is equal under the law and everyone has a right to participate in the economy within the law, is absolutely right. I love Centaur World. I love media like that. I mean, shit, you're watching me play right now a female protagonist who wields a big-ass axe and a big-ass sword, and I had the opportunity of playing a male who plays and uses magic, right? So if you are a kingdom and your mind is a city, your body is the state, so to speak, and your environment is the state, so to speak, then you have to understand economics at a much higher degree, to a much higher degree of sophistication than how we discuss economics in the public forum in the United States. Because it's complicated. It's hard to talk about. It really is, because cities were places of commerce. They were responsible for commerce, okay? And commerce is the obviously the buying and selling of goods, the moving of goods in markets. But that markets were only held at certain times of the year in the medieval world. And so part of me wants to think that that's probably true of the Roman world too, that the temples, the churches, effectively the government controlled when commerce was being done, because that remains true into the modern period, into the 19th and 20th century, that part of what monopoly capitalism was governments handing their responsibility for managing and understanding commerce off to the people who did it. And what happened when they made that choice, when governments and governors made the choice to hand commerce and the managing of the economy off to the people who were already manipulating it the best, is that government became useless to the people that it's responsible to, and that's you and me, the people who aren't already rich and aren't manipulating the markets. And so when I say that you can learn a lot about a person by their influences, you can tell who is a quality governor by what they're reading and by whom they're quoting, right? And because if a person, what I'm getting at is, if a person has, I've said this in my Sea of Stars, if a person has a wide variety of influences, that's a person with a wide variety of thoughts. And in the ancient and even the modern, but especially the ancient and the pre-modern world, being well traveled meant that you could have a lot of different things that you had been exposed to, a lot of different thoughts that you had been exposed to. And so if we're talking thoughts as intellectual contagion, what we can say is that if you've gone and you've talked to a lot of people, or you've been to a lot of other city-states, so to speak, you've been exposed to a lot of other different you've been exposed to a lot of different thought contagions. And if you're a parent, or you're interested, like I am, in the studies on childhood illness, and adult immunity, like adult immune system evolution, you'll know that children who go to preschool they have stronger immune systems overall than children or adults who didn't go to group schools as small children, weren't sent to group environments as small children, where they were exposed to lots of different germs, lots of different contagion. So people who don't read widely, who don't play lots of different kinds of video game, right? By lots of different, god damn it, I'm gonna miss that every time. By lots of different studios, for instance, and don't complete them, right? People who don't read a lot of different books by a lot of different authors and don't complete them. These people, they don't have the ability to think broadly enough. They don't have the ability to think broadly enough to have wisdom, to have anything to teach. Like they can have, it's silly to say, they can teach you by basically what not to do or how not to think, or they're instructive through their error. But like, instruction through error is the lowest form of instruction. Okay? Like, and so what I've been meaning to do is I really need to set this up as more explicitly. I need to talk about myself and how I got to the thoughts that I've come to, because it's not obvious how I came to these thoughts. It's not obvious that these are the thoughts to have, the ones that I'm having. God damn, I fuck that up every time. I'm not saying that we should gatekeep, but I am saying that American blacks did do better economically and socially during Jim Crow than they did following Jim Crow. So all that means is that when you give people a bar to aim to, when you say high is where we're aiming, not high is where we're aiming, but accurate is where we're aiming, and you continue to close the circle narrower, and you say you have a high standard. What happens is that the standard continues to be met, and the standard gets higher and higher, not the opposite. You don't fail more often by insisting on higher standards. What happens, in fact, is you succeed more often and at a higher degree by insisting on higher standards. Oh my god, this fight is so hard. I'm just gonna have to gain some levels because I don't have enough health, I think. Oh, I can't leave. I have to die. So maybe it's that I'm using the wrong weapon. Maybe this weapon's better for this fight. Damn, not if I don't dodge that. I'm saying that when my generation decided that gates were bad in and of themselves, we were wrong. The gates were there because they were doors that had already been opened. They were ways that had already been tried, and those ways turned out to be deadly, dangerous. I'm trying to remember if I talked about fairy tales like Hansel and Gretel as necessary for developing children, because they're lessons. They're teaching children a very particular thing, that houses in the woods are not safe havens. Like, not necessarily safe havens. And so by changing, and I talk so frequently about the Druids and theme, and I think a lot about how we've changed certain themes, and in changing those themes we've lost our ability to teach our children anything useful, right? And that's sort of what I'm thinking about when I'm thinking about gateways. I'm thinking about how millennials can't teach their children anything useful because they rejected all of the useful lessons and history. And I'm thinking about how, like, the gatekeeping racist behavior, saying, well, behaving in a racist way and not being allowed to think and not being allowed to express yourself in the way of 20th or 19th century racists, racial nationalists is what I'm trying to say. Not expressing yourself like a racial nationalist is gatekeeping. It's saying that we know what's behind that door. You're not allowed to open that door. Well, smart people know, like I keep saying, smart people know that the only mathematically correct option is to always ask what's behind the other door, right? Let's go ahead and make myself better. I got a lot of points to spend. So when you tell smart people, increase the effect of herbs. What herbs? When you tell smart people that they're not allowed to look behind doors, the only thing that they're going to do is figure out a way to not just get behind the door, but explore that space like it's the moon and they're the first people to be there. And so what I'm saying is that my generation, the millennials and the Gen Xers who taught us the things that we believe, they taught us that there was nothing over there to explore, and now young people and other people in my generation are exploring those things as though they're for the first time. They're not looking to the past to see whether anyone ever explored them before, and whether the past has given us answers or options, or at least has given us, like I'm saying, has given us the worst kind of wisdom, the not answer, the what not to do, the exemplary answer, right? Because the reason it's the worst answer is because smart people, the reason they are smart is because they didn't take exemplary for an answer. They didn't take it as enough of an answer. Okay? They look, people like me, we look at, and okay, the only way to explain this is to actually explain it, to talk about it from my perspective. My parents were not intelligent. My parents are not highly intelligent people. When I say that as many as 40% of the world are probably born mentally or unfit for the world as it is, my parents were in that group. So I am significantly more intelligent than both of my parents. Now, my father never identified as intelligent. My father never wanted to be seen as intelligent. Now, whether my father is smart or not doesn't matter, because being clever and being a quick problem solver and being intelligent are different things. My father is not an intellective person. My father's not the kind of person who has thoughts and thinks deeply about things. My father is constantly surprised by his thoughts and by having them. My mother, on the other hand, was somebody who did identify as intellective. She identified as somebody who somebody who was going to be an intellectual, whose intellection or intellectivity, or in fact intelligence as she believed it to be, would free her from what she thought of as, and which I have no reason to believe was anything other than, hostile environment which she lived in, that her intellect was going to free her. So my parents were not invested in my education. My mother, I think my mother virtue signaled it for a long time, because when you are raised in the country, having no interest in the education, but an interest in the work ethic of your child is important. When you live in the city and you're around rich people, the only thing that rich mothers virtue signal is how good their children are at being students, right? At the responsibilities of children, but they're not responsibilities, they're duties of children, because a child isn't actually responsible for its own education. The parents are responsible for the child's education. When a child gets bad grades, it's not the child that the teacher pulls aside and says, hey, you're getting bad grades, these are the things that we need to do in an intense and personal one-on-one manner for you to get better grades. No, that's what parent-teacher conferences are for. Parent-teacher conferences are the ways that your child is either excelling and how to continue and push that excellence into a profession or whatever, and how or how your child is failing, and how the teacher and the parent, but specifically the parent, can work with the child to do better. And that's why nobody wants to have this conversation, but that's why parents hate teachers. It's because no parent wants to hear anything other than that their child is perfect. And so now that teachers are employees directly of the parents, the parent doesn't have to hear anything other than that the child is something else. Now, I know what you're saying. Well, when the tutor was a direct employee. Well, the parent, when the child is a tutor, the parent isn't a sovereign nation at that time. In that time, when a parent would, when a Roman or a pre-modern or even a post-modern person would buy their child a tutor, so that the child would actually learn the stuff, not just excel on their test, but actually learn the stuff and actually take the lessons and actually be a genuinely excellent person, they were hiring that tutor to beat their child. They weren't in effect paying, or they didn't believe that they were paying the teacher's salary so the teacher could make their child have good grades. Because to a parent like mine, to an uneducated parent who doesn't understand, in fact, the way the world works, it's as simple as giving the child good grades. Well, you're giving my kid bad grades. Give my kid good grades. It's that simple, right? When your education, you thought you were just getting bad grades. You didn't take the education seriously to understand that there is a right and there is a wrong answer. And there is a correct and there is an incorrect way to get to the answer. And so what I'm saying is that civilization in the 19th century understood intimately and explicitly that there is only one way to get to the right answer. Okay? They chose relativism because they understood that in their lifetimes, they weren't going to puzzle out what the right way was. But there were people who were trying to do it, like Hegel was trying to do it, and Kant, and Voltaire is the 18th century, but Voltaire was trying to do it. And Jesus had tried to do it, and Buddhism is the Buddha having claimed to have done it and come back with the correct answers, right? And in fact, the Buddha said that there was no need for philosophy, when what he meant by philosophy was metaphysics. There was no need to do metaphysics, because we were here to get to there, not to know what there is like. You'll experience there when you get to there, right? So the only thing that matters is living the life that gets you to there. So we understand intimately that there is only one way to get to there, right? If there is enlightenment, and if there is an enlightened, because we never gave up on the idea of the enlightened sovereign, the enlightened monarch. All we did was we descended the responsibility of the sovereign, of the monarch, to the individual from the elite and governing class. So it used to be, I keep saying this, I feel like I haven't articulated this in a way that I never have to say it again. So I feel like I'm just gonna keep saying it over and over and over again. This is the song that never ends. The elite used to be responsible to the king for the non-elite, right? So the reason that everyone was a peasant and no one was free before the French said universal male suffrage, and then the English said no, universal female suffrage, and I know that Beauvoir was French, and I know that Wollstonecraft wasn't wasn't in fact the only feminist, and she's not even a feminist that I entirely agree with. If you just read Frankenstein, which was written by her daughter, you can see her own daughter grappling with how wrong Mary Wollstonecraft was in fact, because Even Mary Shelley, Mary Wollstonecraft's daughter, had to make a daughter make everything better. So Mary Shelley understood that if Mary Wollstonecraft had been a mother and had been a dedicated French mother, right, so to the child of the Mary who became Shelley, if she had been a dedicated mother, she would have given up feminism. But if you look at what feminism does, it makes women bad mothers to their daughters, it makes them terrible mothers to their daughters, and it makes them what's her name, Jocasta, I think. It makes them Jocastas to their son. I think it's the Jocasta complex is the opposite of the Jocasta is the opposite of the Oedipus complex. So feminism turns, what I'm saying is that feminism turns it turns women into vipers, and it turns daughters into venomous Ouroboros, that is tail-eating vipers who are also venomous. So if you try to help them, they will definitely envenom you, and it turns them into Jocastas toward their sons, and Jocasta was, sexually attracted to her son. So feminist mothers either destroy their daughters or try to turn their sons into the husbands they didn't marry, and so it's only unhealthy. It's only unhealthy, is what I'm saying. And what I'm also saying is that is a gate and a way that we traveled as a human species. The whole feminist Jocasta thing, the whole matriarchal society that every third wave and coming fourth wave feminist insists on. We did that once. And so what I'm saying is saying that we haven't done a thing that we have done before. There's only a handful of reasons to do it, and the most obvious reason to do it is because there's money to be made there. And if there's money to be made there, there's no question of whether it's ethical to do, because we have time and time again in Western nations, and now the Eastern nations are doing it, legislated that what all is fair in economic love and war. And so long as you're at a permanent state of war with some barely defined entity, everything is always fair. And so if you can use language like political warcraft to justify what you're doing in the markets, everything you're doing in the market is fair. This is why ignorant fucks on Wall Street read and quote Sun Tzu, The Art of War. This is what I'm saying when I say that your influences speak a lot to your character. Because if you read books for how they can teach you to do the thing that you want, all that you will learn how to do is what you already wanted. You won't learn what the books are saying. So if you pick up the Bible and you say, how are slaves justified? You won't read the parts of the Bible where Jesus is freeing slaves and where Jews are called to free Jewish other Jews from Greco-Roman or Persian, etc., Egyptian slavery. You don't even understand what the definition of slavery means in that book. You just pick up the book and you see where it says that if you own a slave, you're allowed to beat it. And they go, well, they were allowed to own slaves. They were just not allowed to treat them inhumanely. If you are looking to justify your ethic, you will always find it. If you're looking in a work to justify your moral, you will always find it, right? So like people that are like Stephanie Meyer is Mormon, so obviously her work is a Mormon think piece. they're going to find how she's justifying Mormonism. And then people going, well, it's actually her being conflicted about Mormonism because she's Mormon, but she's not practicing, right? But that is exactly the behavior that you're going to tell me is anti-Semitic when I say that that's why people kicked Jews out of every city, because of what I was saying. The city is supposed to think all one thing, because the city is a mind. It's an abstraction that works up and back, because it wasn't noticed until after it was a fact. It is a fact. Ask any sociologist, right? Cities behave in a particular way. They behave based on their ethnic demographic, right? Whatever their ethnic demographics are, ethnic demographics behave in a certain way. And that's why you're not allowed to point out anyone's ethnicity anymore. And that's why we've confused, and since the 90s, we've confused the idea of your ethnicity and your race. Well, your ethnicity is the city that you live in, and it's the block within the city that you live in, right? So, like, if you're from Queens, you're from Queens, right? Everyone from Queens is from Queens. This is why, Key and Peele had that sketch where the white actor is talking in the movie to the black director like he's got this real thick, terrible accent, and then the black guy starts talking and you don't like his accent, and the director's like, oh, I want you to talk like you're from Queens, and the guy's like, I am from Queens. I am talking like I'm from Queens. That other guy's not talking like he's from Queens. He's talking like what you think Queens is like, right? Well, the reason that's offensive to the person from Queens is because Queens is an actual ethnicity, right? It's not a race, but it is an actual ethnicity, right? And ethnicities are allowed to not be made fun of, right? So being from Mexico, you have a particular set of characteristics. There are things that you do. There are things you like. There are things you don't like, right? Even if the things that you don't like are your things, you are allowed to make fun of them, and you are allowed to call them hateful things, and you are allowed to stereotype them and roll your eyes at them because they're your things, right? That's what we decided about ethnicity. We decided to wrap ethnicity up into race, right? That to be white from Queens is to be different than to be black from Queens, and that's an assumption, not of different race and ethnic, not of different genetic background, but of a different ethno-experiential background. That sure, you were white in Queens, but you didn't experience black poverty in Queens. When it's like, well, me, for instance, I experienced more black poverty than many of the black people that I've known, right? So like even when I lived in when I was working at Dollar General, and all of my customers were black, I couldn't afford to shop at Dollar General every day the way they did. They just went into Dollar General to impulse buy shop the way you're supposed to when you have a little bit of money, when you have a little bit of leisure. You're supposed to spend your money, and we've talked about that. That having money, you have an ethical and moral responsibility to spend it, because every dollar that you have is a dollar that somebody else needs, right? This is why I've started really pushing back on the whole small business independent owner thing. Well, it's like, sure, you're an independent owner and you make all of this money that allows you to do your thing, but like, who are you employing? If you're not employing anybody, you're not an owner of a business. You're just doing business for yourself, right? You're not helping the economy. You're just grifting off it, and they don't understand that. But they can't understand that, because they've refused to educate themselves on the path that they're walking. They're insisting that they're walking it for the first time. And this is what I'm talking about when I talk about gateways. The reason there was legislation until the Clinton administration preventing monopolies, and the reason in the 19th century they wanted to take corporate money and lobbyists out of Washington, is because they'd already seen the evils of it. They had lived the evils. They wrote the histories. And then we go, well, the victories write the histories. So if there's a negative opinion in the histories, we want to pretend like all negative opinions are classical and pre-modern polemics. Like, well, they had to be wrong because what they were saying had to be wrong. But Irenaeus his polemics against the Gnostics weren't wrong. That's the thing. The things he was saying about the Gnostics, if you just assume he was lying because he didn't know them, leaves the door to being a Gnostic, and precisely the way he's telling you Gnosticism is evil and a dead end, it leaves it open for you to explore. Because I've talked about exceptionalism. We all have embodied, we've all embodied nationalistic and exceptionalism. Yeah, you want to act like, well, we've learned the lessons of nationalism and we're not going to repeat the mistakes of nationalism because we're going to say that racial nationalism is what caused World War II, and so we're going to say Nazis are bad, and anyone who says, yeah, America, right? Anybody like that is a bad person, and patriotism is bad, right? You're a member of a world, man, right? But they don't understand that they are the nation. And they have all the responsibilities that come with sovereignty. And so what they don't understand is that national exceptionalism went absolutely nowhere. They believe in their own exceptionalism. I have talked on this platform a lot about how college-educated people, but specifically college-educated females, believe that they are the exception to every rule. And you have to believe that you're the exception to every rule if you believe that the lesson of history is that they just didn't follow the path all the way, or they didn't follow the path the right way. Because your education is a christening. And what I mean by that is that when you get your little bachelor's degree, the only thing they don't do is put a dab of oil on your forehead to tell you that you are among the next generation of people who will be shaping the world as Christian, as Christ-like, as anointed. Because you don't, what I hear a lot of people say is that academe pushes you toward getting your PhD. But what people who say that don't understand is that a master's degree is only mastery. The PhD means that not only do you have mastery, but now you have the certification to speak in public. The mastery just means that you have certification to practice. Because the education system that we use, the associates, the bachelors, the masters, and the doctorate was ripped directly off of the way that the Catholic Church managed its priests, and that was ripped directly out of the way the trade crafts managed their hierarchies. Yeah. So if you don't understand what religion is at all, and you definitely don't understand what your education is. Your education is a binding to a subject, to a topic, to an abstraction of learning. And until you have bound yourself all the way to the PhD level, you're not allowed to speak. You don't have the certification to speak. You have the certification to learn for someone who has the certification to speak for you. And that's what gateways are for. That's a kind of gatekeeping. That's saying who is allowed to explore behind what doors. And it's the Druids saying what themes you're allowed to explore. The PhDs exist, the doctors exist to remind the masters and the bachelors, and especially the associates, of what the themes are and how to stick to them. But we live in a world run by apprentices. We're not even an asylum that is run by the inmates. Everything is run by apprentices. The people with mastery and the people with doctor means speaker. Anyway, the people with certification to speak and the people with mastery, certified mastery, are the only people who aren't allowed to participate. because they're the only people with any concept of where the gate should be. And since the 90s, we've decided that the gate should be torn down. There should be no gates. There should be no gates, and there should be no gatekeepers. So now the degree of our social conversation is as low as it's ever been. It's as low as it's ever been. It's lower than it was during the European Dark Ages. It's lower than it was during the Greek Dark Ages. It's never been as low as it currently is. And the only way it's getting any higher is to insist on an individual level that it be higher, and to insist of ourselves individually that we be able to perform at a higher level of social discourse, because whether we like it or not, each one of us is a sovereign nation, and we are all at war. The only way that you're going to survive the war, the only way that you're going to get any better at fighting the war, is to acknowledge that you are at war, and to figure out with whom you aren't at war and with whom you are allied in the war. Because you are at war, whether you like it or not. The ideologies established themselves as at war with one another 200 plus years ago. In doing so, you inherited that war, which might be the one thing that most offended me about Sea of Stars. And I may never actually get around to doing a video that's titled Sea of Stars Review, because I hate it too much to finish it a second time, and I don't want to dig through my videos to look at it. So, but anyway, I think the one thing that I hated the most about it was when Brewgraves said that he didn't want to be Jesus of the sun anymore, or Jesus of the moon, in fact. He didn't want to be Jesus of the moon anymore because he didn't want to fight a war that he didn't start. Now, I know that the developers, the writers of that, didn't mean to make people who are doing the thing that I said, insisting that they're not sovereign and that they're not responsible for the wars of ideology, make them the actual villains of the game. The writers didn't mean to do that. They didn't mean to make Brewgraves a coward. They thought they were making Brewgraves a turncoat and a Judas. But the reason Judas killed Jesus had nothing at all to do with abandoning the war. And the gospel writers knew that. That's why they named him Iscariot. His name meant Jew of the particular assassin's curved dagger. Okay? So they didn't think that guy was a coward, and they didn't think that that guy was trying to get out of the war for getting out of the war's sake. They definitely didn't think that Jesus was killing, or rather, Judas was killing Jesus to get out of rebelling against the Romans for the sake of rebelling against the Romans. In fact, the gospel writers thought Judas killed Jesus because Jesus wasn't willing to actually pick up a sword and take outright war to the Romans. Alright? That's a very different thing. So you don't get to say, what I'm saying, just like Brewgraves, you don't get to say that you don't want to participate in the wars of ideology because you don't want to participate, because you don't believe that the ideologies should be fighting. Do you know how I know that? I spent 35 years with that standpoint. I spent 35 years as a conscientious objector to the wars of ideology because I believed as a relativist that they were all relative and they were all wrong in their relativism because none of them was offering a universal answer. Now, that remains true in their relativism. They remain wrong because none of them offers a universal answer. But I thought that I was not the person who was even allowed to seek out the answers because I'm a poor person, I'm not rich, I'm not a college student, I don't have a PhD. But here's the thing: the only people engaged on in the conversation right now are people with third grade educations, are the people who said, are people who are saying that you can disengage, that you don't actually have to have an ideology. And I'm here to tell you they're wrong. You do have to have an ideology. You have to pick an ideology, and you have to fight for it. If you want to say, well, I have no ideology, I don't believe in ideology, what you're saying is that you're agnostic. And if what you're not saying in your agnosticism is that you're looking, what you're saying is that you're atheist. And if you're an atheist, you have to die. In every era in history, atheists have to die. Do you understand that atheists are non-participants? And if you are a non-participant in an abstract representational society, the society has no use for you. I mean, it's reductive and redundant to say that if you're a non-participant, you're not participating. But if you're not participating, imagine, if you're a fan of the NFL, being a conscientious non-participant while playing on the field. What is a team that's playing 10 to 11 or a soccer game? I watched a women's American soccer team whomp on Japan 5 or 6 years ago, and it didn't help that Japan had a player that was disqualified, so they were playing 5 on 6, I believe. So what is a team that has non-participants? Well, a team that has non-participants has people on their active roster, on the active game day roster, who aren't playing. And what did we learn during World War I? We learned that if you have people who are unwilling to pull the trigger, you don't get casualties in your war. Alright? What did we learn during Vietnam? There was a whole famous study that wants to be discredited, and people want to say it was bogus and yada 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 yada, because Democrats are hawks of war, and they don't need the casualties. They need the war. So Democrats are happy with what I'm about to say, and they would actually prefer that the trenches were full of people like this. Something like 40 to 60% of people in an active combat engagement with a long-ranged weapon, a firearm in this case, will aim above the heads of visible enemies. They will intentionally try not to wound their enemy. 40 to 60% is what I read. It could be higher. 75 to 80% of people will intentionally try not to wound the enemy. So what you have to do, if you're a modern nation state, now hear that as an actual modern nation state like the United States of America, but also hear that as an individual. If you're a modern nation state, you have to figure out a way to get people to pull the trigger at a significantly higher rate than 20 to 40%. Okay? I mean, 40 to 60%. You need significantly more than 40 is your low mark and 60 is your high mark of your people shooting guns to actually aim at the parts of the enemy that will kill them. You need a significantly higher proportion than 60%. And so what you have to do is you have to figure out thought control. You have to figure out how to control people's thoughts. If you can control people's thoughts, you can control people's actions. If you can control people's actions, you can get much more, probably as many as 99% of people, to aim their guns at the soft, mortal, vulnerable parts of the enemy. And if you can get a higher percentage of your people to shoot at the soft, killable flesh of the enemy, even if you have a significantly smaller number of people, you can cause a significantly higher number of casualties. And what World War I taught us is that the team that takes the higher number of casualties, whether they're dead casualties or injured casualties, is the side that loses. It wasn't just World War I that taught us that. I say taught us that because I'm speaking, I assume, to a world population. The Civil War taught us that the side that takes the most losses, the side that has the most injuries. I mean, fuck, every NFL season teaches us the team with the most injuries is the team that does the worst. You need your best players on the field. You need the best, most capable people, the people who are most capable of not only pulling the trigger in the direction of the soft spots of your enemy, but hitting the soft spots of your enemy. You need those people on the combat field. That's why in World War I you could get World Wars I and II, Vietnam. This is how you could get more than one Purple Heart, and why now we sneer at the Purple Heart. We sneer at the Purple Heart because of the Gulf War and the conflicts following the Gulf War, because the Purple Heart was a ticket home. It was a ticket home forever. But, like, McCain didn't get his Purple Heart and come home. He got his Purple Heart and he got another Purple Heart. Like, you don't get multiple Purple Hearts without actually being willing to pull the fucking trigger. Or at least standing in front of a motherfucker who's willing to pull the trigger at you. And that's a different kind of courage. Like, that's a different kind of bravery. That's a different kind of mortal stupidity. Being willing and able to stand in an area where a motherfucker is willing to pull the trigger in your direction is equally as difficult to find people that are willing to do. It's an equally rare skill set. So what am I talking about? I'm talking about gatekeeping. And so what we've been doing is we've been gatekeeping people who are willing to pull the trigger out of society. We figured out how to do it, how to get them to do it, and then our hearts got soft. And so now what we're trying to do is we're gatekeeping for softness. We want people to be malleable. Because if people who are willing to pull the trigger are willing to stand up for something, and people who are willing to stand up for something won't fall for anything. You stand for literally anything, and you have something to lose. If you have something to lose, you can't be hoodwinked. And if you can't be hoodwinked, you won't vote. You just won't vote. You won't vote for anybody. If you're too skeptical to be hoodwinked, you're too skeptical to listen to Dave Johnson and John Davidson talk to you. It's just how it is. And so your government for the last 100 years, but especially since the 1960s, has been committed to making you both stupid and docile, unable to defend yourself and unable to defend your country, unable to defend your individual sovereignty, but also unable to defend the sovereignty of your nation as such. And the reason they did that is because the Confederacy, the South never died, Southern Democrats never went anywhere, and if Southern Democrats are ever going to keep us in a permanent state of war with Russia, because Russia's figured out that Russia figured out that the Cold War, pretty fucking lucrative. It's pretty fucking lucrative being in the Cold War. And I'll tell you, I know who knows it was lucrative being in the Cold War is every Democrat who lived through the 1980s. Remembers how lucrative the Cold War was, because I've already said in this space that the only time that the United States was ever actually culturally relevant on the world stage was during the 1980s, because we were the only people that the world, because something that you don't understand, again, if you aren't looking at your gates, if you're not examining the world's gates, something you don't understand is that the world never actually underestimated Russia. What the world did was make sure that Russia's economy tanked every few decades, because Russia's fucking huge and has an enormous number of people. I've said this, but all Russia needs to do is mobilize some of the people on their eastern border, and France is gone. They have so many more people than France does. And so if the reason that England didn't actually conquer India is because they just frankly didn't have enough people to replace the population, Russia has the population. Russia has enough people that would much happier, Russia has plenty of people that would be much happier to live in Paris than Russia. Much happier to live in Paris and let Paris decay to rusted nothing because they have no reason to keep it the way it is, or better, than where they live. You don't think Siberians would rather live in Russia? How do you think the Russian army always has people in it? They're like, hey, if you join the Russian army, eventually we'll get in a war with the people that will lose and you can live there. Now, it's been hundreds of years since they've won a war, but that doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. The Democrats, they know the history. You have to be at a permanent state of war with Russia, because as soon as Russia starts winning battles, Russia gets serious momentum, because Russia is the Hun. Russia is the steppe people. Like, Christ. You can't forget your history. It's not even the doomed to repeat it thing. It's that somebody's going to do it worse. Like, Putin, you don't think Putin knows his history? You don't, like, the thing that bothers me is that I ask the question, do I think Biden knows history? And no, I don't. That's what frightens me about him. And do I think Kamala Harris knows history? No, I don't. I voted for McCain, and then I voted for Obama, and I would vote for Trump now. I didn't vote for Trump, and I didn't vote for Biden. I didn't vote in those elections because I didn't think those men knew history. But now Trump has proven that he at least knows history, his own history. He at least knows his personal history. And his personal history as a sovereign nation is one that's been conquered and incorporated so many times, annexed, unannexed so many times, it's not funny. But that was why I didn't vote for him initially, and that's why I would vote for him now, because it's kind of hilarious, because I didn't realize how true it was that we are all sovereign nations and that you have to choose to whom you're incorporated. You have to know your history. And this isn't really what I wanted to talk about. I mean, you gotta know your influences. You have to know what you're influenced by. You have to know what you've consumed. And you have to know the influences of the people that you're consuming. And you have to know the influences of their influences. Influences matter. The influences matter. Fluency is being able to speak comprehensively. It's being able to communicate effectively. If you're fluent in a language, it means that you can effectively communicate in that language. And so to be influent, right, means that somebody can speak fluently. They can speak. They can communicate effectively through you. It means that you have communicated so effectively that other people can use you. That's what it means to be influent. They can use the way that you live to guide their life. That's what it means to be influential. And so when Karl Marx says that history is the competition of markets, of nations for their markets, he's fucking wrong. What history is the competition to be fucking influential. It's to be remembered. It's to have the one and only right answer for forever. And we have given up on that. We've given up we've given up on it explicitly. We haven't given up on it implicitly. The Democrats will put you in jail. So they clearly haven't given up on believing that their way is the right way. But like Irenaeus and Augustine both said of the Gnostics, their right way is the wrong way. And they believe it's the right way, so they're unwilling to question it. Which is why Democrats and conservatives both need you to not accurately read polemic historians, and why they need you to believe that what's most accurate or most likely about a historical writing is if the author says something is true, it's untrue, and if they say that something is bad, it's probably good. The reason they need you to believe that is so when you have the impulse that this doesn't, or the instinct that this doesn't seem like it's intuitively the right thing to do, they can say, but your instincts are always wrong. Which is what I once told a black girl. She asked me what I thought about my thoughts as a white guy vis-a-vis black people, and I said, well, what I've had to teach myself is that my first thought is always wrong. Whatever my first thought is, I have to ask myself, what else is it? Which is interesting, because linguists and bossy corporate types will tell you that the first thing you say is what you mean, without understanding that meaning is just commonality. And so, yeah, the first thing you say is your first attempt at commonality with the person you're communicating with. It's not some kind of Freudian secret underlying of your subconscious, because, as I say, the first thing that you think is always wrong. It's always wrong. It's always best to second guess what the first thing you think. But the first thing you think, as I've said, and swinging back around on Jews and people who aren't me in general, is that your first thought is usually right for the wrong reasons. Your math is wrong, but your answer is right. right? When I used to say that segregation is bad to any way that you do it. And so saying I'm black and I'm allowed to like black things and you're white, you're not allowed to like black things, that kind of segregation is just wrong and stupid. I used to say that. Well, I was I was right for the wrong reasons. I was right. It is stupid, but my reasons were wrong. My reason was bleeding heart egalitarianism, that we're all equal and that all of our self-expressions are equal in their own right, when in fact it's wrong because they're being elitist and hurtful, and they're not being willing to not second guess but be self-critical. And if you're not willing to be self-critical, you're automatically wrong. You're just automatically wrong. Because if you don't know the reasons you're wrong, if you don't know the reasons that you're wrong, you can't know the reasons you're right. So if you haven't been self-critical, if you haven't thought critically, if you haven't asked yourself, am I wrong about that? In fact, you're just wrong, even if you're right. Which is why nobody likes men's rights groups, or these people that come out and speak pro men or whatever. The reason you don't like them is because they haven't really thought out what they're saying, and by not exactly thinking out what they're saying, they're proving that you haven't exactly thought out what you're saying. Because as soon as you go to argue with them and they push back at all, you realize you don't already have a pre-planned argument. And if you don't have a pre-planned argument, you haven't thought about it. If you're using pre-planned arguments, you haven't thought about it. As soon as you get into canned phrases, tropes, cliches in your argument, when you're in your self-expression, you haven't thought about what you're expressing. You're not expressing yourself. Because, like we said when we broke down that idiosyncratic thoughts and depression article, if you're thinking popular thoughts, you're not thinking your thoughts. You're thinking someone else's thoughts because you think it'll make someone like you. Because thinking someone else's thoughts is indistinguishable from being liked. Because the only thing people like is seeing their thoughts reflected in other people. So that's what loneliness and depression are, is not seeing your thoughts reflected in other people. And that's exactly what popularism as a political medium is just saying what other people are already going to like. But what other people are already going to like is automatically wrong. That's why Game of Thrones is bad. You only liked it because you wanted to like it, because other people liked it, because it was popular, because it was... You wanted to like it because you thought it was different. You wanted to believe the popular entertainment media were telling you this is the kind of thing that doesn't get made. Oh, we don't make high-end, high-budget fantasy movies. And it's like, well, there's a reason we don't make high-end, high-budget fantasy movies. It's because if you break fantasy down, it's pretty fucking dumb. If you break fantasy down to its core elements, fantasy's dumb as hell. Fantasy's it's just a political thriller and dumb period pieces with bad dialogue, guys. It always has been. The reason you like Lord of the Rings is because you like dumb political thrillers and dumb period piece. You like the period, and you like the dumb thriller of it all, and that's fine. That's beautiful, but it's still bad. It's not popular because it's good. It's popular because it's things people already like in a way they didn't know they already liked. What are the core elements of Game of Thrones? They're attractive prostitutes being naked, attractive males fucking attractive prostitutes, and glorious combat with women in armor. That's things everybody's liked since Jeanne d'Arc, guys. Jeanne d'Arc was a popular political figure for all of those things. Daenerys is Jeanne d'Arc on a dragon. It's not interesting. I'm sorry, it's just not interesting. It's not even a boring cliche. It's just a cliche. And see, what I'm doing is gatekeeping, and you're going, that's gatekeeping, it's gatekeeping, it's gatekeeping, you're being reductivistic, and being reductivist is gatekeeping. And it's like, gatekeeping. I'm not telling you you're not allowed to explore what's behind the door. I'm telling you that we put a door up there for a reason. We already know what's back there. We've already mapped and explored that out to the point that we built walls around it and put a fucking door in front of it. Like, there's a wall with the gate, guys. Like, you're gatekeeping, right? Because there was a wall built around this. Like, if you don't build a wall around it, it's just the dilapidated, undead, undying, forbidden city. And what is a forbidden city? It's a place where people used to live and died horribly, probably of a disease, probably of famine or some uncurable contagion. And so, what is a forbidden city in an intellectual sense? Marxism. It's just Soviet Marxism. Just don't do it. Just don't do it. They all died for a reason. Like, and so that's what people want to do when they're like, oh, no new nuclear technology. We already explored that. And it's like, right, it's clean, it's cost effective, it's better. Yeah, we have been down that road. We don't, in fact, need to look up new technologies. What we need to do is improve what we've got. Right, but that's a conservative impulse. I mean, that is what conserving is taking what you've got and either wearing it until wearing it literally on your person, as far as like if it were a clothing, and literally until it falls off, and then being in the Dark Age panic state of, now what do? We have no fucking ritual clothing, or repairing it as needed, like the hat situation. I don't remember what the hat was called, but the hat situation in the Middle Ages went from being a cloak to, depending on how you rolled and folded the cloak, that showed your social station, but it was still, everybody was still wearing the same cloak, which was ritually, the point was, well, we're still made of the same stuff. Some of us are just made of better stuff, and some of us fold and manipulate our stuff in better ways. But isn't that true? Isn't that what I was saying about gates and gatekeeping? Aren't there people outside the gates because the people inside the gates are having the better conversation? And the reason you're not allowed in is because you might need to be quarantined first? But this refusal to be quarantined, this refusal to go through the process, I get it. I get where it comes from. It comes from girls who wanted to be metalheads constantly having to prove that they listen to the right metal in order to be allowed to be metalheads. But also girls who want to be metalheads and don't like that you have to constantly prove that you like the right metal in order to be metalheads. Look at what other girls who want to like and be called metalheads like. They like trash. That's why you have to like good stuff in order to be called a good metalhead. You actually have to listen to the bands, because there are girls that are making money off of what you say you are who don't. So there is a standard that has to be upheld for a reason. It's not there for no reason. It's like they didn't go through the effort to build the door and build the walls and put a cap and a ceiling on it and put fucking castles and shit inside it for no reason. Like, we didn't find... What's that city that I'm thinking about? What's any one of those abandoned cities that I'm thinking about? Let's just use Machu Picchu. It's not the one that I'm thinking about. Mohenjo-Daro is not the one I'm thinking about either. It's really going to bother me. Anyway, Machu Picchu. Let's just say Machu Picchu. When we found Machu Picchu, no one went, this has no reason. No one thought... no one thought of the pyramids... This is a natural stone formation. No one in the history of seeing those. Not even when the Sphinx was, not even when they were under the sand and all you could see was those caps that's poking out, that the white caps that you can see at the top now that are clearly at a different kind of erosion. No one saw those and went, this is a natural rock formation. Do you know how I know that no one saw that and thought this is a natural rock formation? The amount of human effort that went into fucking unburying them. I don't know if you've ever dug in sand. That shit's impossible to move. And keep moved. Keep meffed? Keep gone. That's a weird word. Wait, how often do we turn oov into effed? now that I think about it. Why did my brain think it was meft? Because you don't say "luve it" and "left it." Do you? No, you say "leave" and "left." I'm just dumb. What was I talking about? I was talking about gates and influences. And why certain kinds of people weren't allowed in certain kinds of cities. And we look at it now with our postmodern, post-egalitarian self-satisfaction. Because every time something good happens for a white person, the entire white not a white person, a black person or a Jewish person or a non-white person, the whole white community pats themselves on the back and goes, "Voila! Racism is gone! Praise be to white Jesus." And it's like, okay, you just undid it, guys. But black people have now moved racism and that particular kind of virtue signaling, which is identifying racism in white people. They have now inhabited that city because white people did the, all right, racism's over, cleaned their hands, and left the damn city. They abandoned the city. So, I mean, it was a perfectly good city and black people didn't have one of their own. Why wouldn't they inhabit it? Why wouldn't they? And then, like, it's so funny because, like, the bullied child in me, I almost said the bully in me, like the person who wants to be a bully, but no, the bullied child in me looks out and wants to, like, point the finger and wants to tell Jewish people, like, you motherfuckers need to be offended. Blacks are stealing your whole shtick, but they can't because they don't have a city. They don't believe in a city. They believe in a single one exact city, Jerusalem, right? But even among themselves, they're atheist of that city. We talked about it last time, that to be Jewish is to either be a practicing Jewish and believe that you are the Messiah, or to be a non-practicing cultural Jew and to be atheist about the city, which means to be a Jew in diaspora, which means to be Greek, not Jewish. But to be Jewish, to be, I believe it's Yehudin, in order to be that, is in opposition of being Greek. So there's only two ways of being. There's Jewish and non-Jewish. So if you're a non-practicing cultural Jew, you're not Jewish. You don't get to be offended when people say anti-Semitic things. And the reason your culture-ish is so you wouldn't be rounded up in the first place. So you aren't in the conversation anyway. And involving yourself in the conversation is that particular thing I'm talking about, where we all want to be nation states involved in the UN on the national level. That's why we're all on social media, is to make this claim of being just as important as a government, and to be in fact a government in our own, and to be responsible in and to ourselves. But when you do that, you have to answer to yourself. And so the point in doing that was that the only person you had to answer to was yourself. So, which is a fundamental misidentification of who God is. Because what Christianity said is that, what's the phrase I'm looking for? When you have a centralized organized government. The centralized organized government was too expensive and it was impossible with the infrastructure of the medieval state. So what they said is it was kind of a capitulation really to Germanic, i.e. Norse, i.e. Celtic. It was a capitulation to the way that they governed, in a sense. And what that means is that all crimes are punishable only under the eyes of God, that no man is able to judge another man in punishment, and that's why the church allowed jurisprudence to take over in court cases, and in fact why the church did not like to get involved in court cases. The Inquisition didn't actually execute anyone. The Inquisition tortured a lot of people, but they weren't allowed to draw blood. So the Inquisition lived in an extremely precarious moral and ethical gray area. But they didn't kill anyone. Everyone that died as a result of the Inquisition died because of bloodthirsty nobility. Because the church was not representative. The church did not say, we're going to live this way, and you miss the mark of how we live, but your errors are covered up by the quality of how we live. Like I've said, French nobility. That was how French nobility worked. That's not how the Christian church worked. The way the Christian church worked, and the reason the Christian church became so totalitarian by the 1500s, is that the Christian church set the fucking bar. That I've insisted that there has to be a cultural bar. There has to be a cultural standard. There has to be a bar. The church set the bar and expected everyone to live at that bar. And so, by also embodying forgiveness, sure, the church would torture you. The church would break you to little pieces. But the church also believed that the church was responsible to you for putting you back together and making you not only hale and whole, but better. So the church didn't kill anyone. The church never, ever viewed anyone as irredemptive. And so when you look in our world now at this argument between the liberals, the Democrats in America, and the conservatives or the Republicans, again in America, what you see is a vengeful liberal class that won't ever allow the Republicans to get better, but continues to lower the bar of their own behavior. So they hold the Republicans to a higher standard. But the reason they hold the Republicans to a higher standard is because the Republicans hold themselves to a higher standard, because the Republicans realize where the standard is by their individual and their collective shortcomings. So where they individually and collectively miss the bar, that's when they realize, oh, this is what needs to be changed and improved. Whereas the Democrats only point to their opponents and say, well, racism has to be changed and improved. Crime has to be changed and improved, right? America's perception as an immigrant country that is unsympathetic and lacks empathy toward the suffering and the needy immigrant of the world. Like they identify themselves in opposition to things, and the things, their enemies, the wars that they fight, the war on crime, the war on drugs, the war on terror, these are not nation states, these are ideas. Because individuals can jihad against an idea. Muhammad made that very clear. Another thing that 18th and 19th century American politicians agreed on, they could agree not to be French and they could agree not to be Muslim. And what it means to be Muslim is it means to submit. It means to submit. It means to give up, give in, to be something's slave. Now, the something that Muhammad wants you to be a slave to, that the typical imam or the typical Muslim proselytizer wants you to submit to, is Allah, the one, the good. They want you to submit to Plato and his God, but that's uninteresting for our purposes. Being critical of Islam is too easy to be intellectually interesting to me. Like being critical of an individual Muslim might be difficult. It's not. But the reason it's easy is because Islam claims for itself, and rightly so, to be the reason the West has Aristotle. but Islam didn't learn any of the lessons of Aristotle. If you've ever listened to a Muslim try to make a categorical argument, he's making pre-categorical arguments. Because Islam didn't in fact have categories, and Plato and Aristotle would have both been anathema and heretical to Muhammad himself. So modern Islam, anything that's not fundamentalist Islam, so that is any Islam that's not currently in jihad and actively at war with the very world, even improper Islam, isn't Islam. In the same way that in the same way that to be a cultural Jew isn't to actually be Yehudim, right? It's to be racially, it's to be descendants of those people, but to not participate in anything other than the cultural artifacts of your family, because your family at one point used to practice, or people in your family still do, and you pretend like you still do, because that pretense, like I've said, that pretense at sameness is what staves off depression, right? And so staving off depression is what religion is for. Because if you're not the king, or you're not one of the nobility that are actually making if you're not one of the king's advisors, like if you're not one of the 10 most powerful people in the country, or the wives of the 10 most powerful people in the country, your life is fucking brutally depressing in every era of human history, including this one. Like, you want to look at YouTube and TikTok, and you want to see these people like bragging about how much money they make online. The reason that they're bragging online about how much money they make, the reason these girls on TikTok make videos of themselves in their thong underwear from behind, laying on their bellies with their butts pushed up in the air, complaining about how they wish they had a boyfriend so they could be a girl in the pre-modern sense, is because not being a girl, or being a woman in the postmodern sense really, but not being a girl in the pre-modern sense, is fucking depressing. It's being a man, especially being a male at any point in human history, is lonely, lonesome, and fucking depressing. These women like Wollstonecraft and de Beauvoir, like they want to act like being a man is fun, because men talk about adventure and glory and all these things. They talk about these big words, but they talk about these big words because their lives are fucking depressing. They're fucking sad. I've talked about it before. Maybe I haven't talked about it on this pod, but I've talked about it before. And the mortality rate of the pre-modern world was high, but it was way higher than death and a hostile environment than famine, etc. explains. And the harshness of the punishment among late Christian churches, communities, and the prevalent, or the severity of the punishment and the prevalence of the act in literature means that I don't believe for a second that when historians say the reason that the life expectancy and the death rates were so high was because of infant mortality, I don't believe them at all. I fully believe that it was self-ends. People choosing their own out, because life was impossibly difficult. And if you listen to any good historian speak about any history, the number of self-ends that you're going to hear about is fucking remarkable. It's fucking remarkable, the number of people that just decided that, yep, this is the end. I've put myself in a dead end. And the thing is, the number of people that are right about that is not. It's not remarkable. It's stunning. because they're right. The American social safety net of second chances for people who sin, and the reason that the conservatives maintain that the way you get better is by missing the mark, and the way that you judge what is bad is by missing the mark, is unique in history. And I am proud of my country for being unique in that. This cancel culture that we all talk about, that the people who participate it roll in their eyes and say it doesn't exist, even while insisting that someone be canceled. It doesn't exist. This culture of canceling people doesn't exist. The people that say that should be canceled. That thought control, that censorship, that is cancel culture. It's a refusal to learn, and it's a refusal to allow people to grow. And what it is it's that same, it's a, I don't know. I thought I knew what it was, and it's preverbal. It's a European thing. When the US does it, we're trying to be like Europeans, because when you have a noble class of landed people who, when you have a class of people who are genetically allowed to make decisions regardless of how many mistakes they have. You have World Wars 1 and 2, but specifically you have World War 1, right? You have all that devastation, you have all that slaughter, you lose whole generations of people. And so people get one chance on the public stage, because what Europe watched happen over and over and over and over again is noble-born people who were born to rule continue to be allowed to rule no matter how bad at it they were. Emperor Wilhelm, for instance. No matter how bad they were allowed to continue. I mean, that's what Bond is about in a lot of ways, right? Is Bond is hyper capable because the other people in MI6 are they're all genetically born to MI6, right? So they're not capable. And they never get better. In fact, they get promoted to get out of decision makings, out of decision making positions, and then end up making worse decisions for more people, right? Like Jutland in World War I. Okay, that is analogous and happens all the time in the United States in the NFL. It's a conversation among sports analysts that first-round picks, especially people who are drafted in the top 10, will continue to get chance after chance after chance after chance, and will continue to make much, much, much more than they're actually worth because someone evaluated them high once. Same thing. Trent Richardson, for instance. I mean, some of you will say, like, Baker Mayfield, right? It's a thing that happens all the time in the NFL. It's a conversation that's happening all the time. And in order to continue having the conversation, like, we don't know the answer, like we don't know what's behind the door, so we're just going to describe the facade of the door and some of the buildings that we can see poke up above the wall, which is what we're doing when we're on Sports Talk. I've thought very much, and comment and let me know. I've thought very much about doing a podcast series called Philosophy for the Football Fan, where I take these ideas that I talk about broadly in philosophy and just take them and directly funnel them through current events in sports, because everything is cyclical. And something I didn't fully appreciate by having not studied 19th century philosophy is that the philosophy was done. Philosophy was completed. Philosophy was completed in the 19th and 20th centuries. The reason that I know that philosophy was completed in the 19th and 20th centuries is because clinical and scientific psychology and psychiatry genuinely believe that they are the physical and practical application of metaphysics and philosophy in the same way that engineering and music are the practical applications of mathematics. Exactly the same way. It's not It's not similar. I'm not being funny in my language. It's exactly the same. It's a one-to-one relationship. And I'm going to prove it. I told you I've been spending my personal research time when I'm not breaking apart the 20th century. I've been reading up on the American Psychological Association, the APA, and the men that founded and the men that founded the APA and the original people that started psychiatry. That's what my personal interest research is going into, and I'm going to tell you right now, those men were extremely fraudulent. The industry is fraudulent. It's built on the backs of fraudulent people. So when I say your influences say a lot about you, your influences say a lot about you. And look at that. 2 hours and 4 minutes without so much as forgetting what I was talking about and needing to look at the time to see if I had time to get myself there. I should fight this boss fight for your amusement. Would you like it if I did that? If I tried this boss fight again? Let's try this boss fight again. I don't actually remember where it is. Is it this way? I'll save, and we'll do this boss fight, and that will be that. I mean, I'm done. I'm done talking about gateways. I never really got what I wanted to talk about was how but I said it. I mean, I said it. And I didn't need to expound on it. I mean, if you have a gate, there's a wall. And if there's a wall, it was inhabited once. And if it's abandoned, there's a reason it's abandoned. And if the guards on the outside are trying to keep you in and people from getting out, you're talking about a fantasy novel. You're talking about the White Walkers, right? And if you're not reading your literature and you're not seeing these metaphors and you're not understanding these metaphors, you're not reading. You're not reading well. You're reading very badly. And if you're reading literature where the author isn't thinking about these things, you're reading poorly written literature. You're reading bad literature. You're wasting your own time. But you can frequently tell when when an author doesn't actually have anything to say by how bad their grammar is. Like if you can't even take the time to say what you're trying to say and with good sentence structure, like if you're writing at the speed of speech, speed of thought, and your sentences are poorly structured, you're a bad reader and a terrible writer. Because the only way to learn how to structure your sentences is to read millions of structured sentences, either poorly or well. Because one thing I've noticed from these lectures that I've been listening to is the ones that the best ones are lecturers who are actually frequently using turns of phrase that they read and enjoyed. All right, boss fight, and I'm not gonna talk through it really. This is gonna take me forever if I get hit with every headbutt like that. This game could use a dodge roll. Hey, I got that one, and then he's gonna punch me with that one. Hey. I learned the boss's moveset. And then he's gonna... But because of my shoes, I can run in the lava a little bit. And then he's gonna headbutt down. And then I can... And then he's gonna spit a dude out, right? And then that guy's gonna come at me. And then he's gonna headbutt down. And then he gets his arms back. Hey, this is as well as I've done. Yeah, sometimes you just gotta gain levels, man. Hoyow! And then punch. Yow! And then, yeah, fuck you. I really like this game, actually. It's pretty well made. Very well balanced. Come on, fuck you. And then he's gonna headbutt me. Pop out! And I'm gonna get hit by it. And then he spits the thing. And then Headbutt. And then I'm gonna not let the thing hit me that time. Look at that. Oh no, the platforms are all fucked up. Ah, that was not great. What's this? Oh shit. Okay, didn't know he did that. I'm taking too much damage by jumping down in the lava like that. Oh, I haven't let him do this in a while. I wish there were a way for me to heal. I guess if I stood still, I don't know if it'll work in a boss fight. Oh, well, that was stupid. Shit. Get off of me. I'm doing really badly now. Shit. I just happened to be doing the spinny attack when that thing... Oh, it's not even the spinny attack. I'm not using the right weapon, but I killed him! Fuck you! Yeah! I'm a man! I'm a winner! I'm a man. Can you tell I've been watching old Thick 44? Well, old Neeb stuff with Thick 44 in it. Miss you, Thick, buddy. Alright, now the game needs to give me a save point so I can turn this off. Thank you so much for making it this far. To the end, that is. Yeah, I'll be back. I'll do this again soon. I've been talking about gateways, gatekeeping, and about having more than just a few influences. Do that. Read widely, even things you don't like. Learn from the things that you don't like. Take lessons from everything. I keep seeing people say to read less, but read it better. And it's like, no, read more, but read it better. Alright, goodbye. Thank you very much.